Okay, so yeah, this is Dispositionalism's Granddaddy Issues, Time Traveling and Perfect Masks by Giannini Giacomi and Donatella Donati in analysis. As opposed to the last paper, which was in analysis but from 80 years ago, 82 years ago. This is forthcoming. So let's see how the papers and analysis have changed. Okay. But yeah, cool. So, dispositionalism is the view that all modal truths are grounded in the potentialities of actual entities. So, quote, it is possible that the vase breaks is true because a vase instantiates an irreducible dispositional property, that is, fragility. Yeah, so, again, immediately, if you don't know the sort of like modal truths and what that means, modal is basically a different sort of like modalities are like practicality, like you talk like what's practical, what's if you're talking about like mathematical, that would be the mathematical area. So you're talking about like areas, and so what can happen in that area? Well, then like if talking about the modality of vases, like what do vases do? They have a dispositional property, they are fragile, and so breaking is something that can happen when you're talking about that group of things. Okay. The canonical version of the theory is due to Vedder and consists of the following two theses, and I guess that's the dispositionalism thing here. Diamond. It is metaphysically possible that P, if and only if something has, had, or will have an iterated potentiality for it to be the case that P. And D box, so this is usually the possibility symbol is the diamond and the box is the necessity symbol. It is metaphysically necessary that P, if and only if it is not possible that not P, that is, if nothing has, had, or will have an iterated potentiality for it to be the case that not P. Yeah, so if it's possible that it has something, then it has a potential to do that, and if it's necessary for something, then it's necessary that it that the opposite doesn't happen. Okay, we will argue that adopting dispositionalism creates some special troubles with regard to time travel. In particular, we will argue that adopting dispositionalism prevents one from dispelling the grandfather paradox, at least as far as we retain the idea that killing one's grandfather is impossible. In short, we will maintain that the following three theses are inconsistent, given some further assumptions defended below. Time travel is the first one. So, time travel is metaphysically possible. Okay. Possibility is the second one. If something has an iterated potentiality for it to be the case that P, then it is possible that P. And then the third one is no self-defeat. It is metaphysically impossible to perform a self-defeating action, such as killing one's grandfather. Okay, so yeah, this is the no grandfather paradox here. And they're saying that once you have this sort of potentiality stuff, you are going to have a lot of trouble. Because, I mean, we're going to assume time travel. You want to have time travel because it's more fun that way. We will suggest that the problem at hand is an instance of a more general issue for dispositionalism, namely that of necessarily perfect masks. Don't know what mask is, and that the decision as to which of these theses to ultimately reject will depend in part on the broader strategy adopted to tackle that issue. The paper is structured as follows. In section 1, we present a potentiality-based version of the grandfather paradox. In 2 and 3, we justify additional premises needed for the argument. In section 4, we show why the standard solutions to the grandfather paradox are not available to the dispositionalist. Finally, in section 5, we argue that this is a case of necessary perfect masking. We conclude in section 6. Okay, the problem. So, yay, we get to talk about grandfather paradox. The central idea of the grandfather paradox is that, were time travel possible, there seems to be nothing that would stop one from performing certain self-defeating actions. These are actions that, if performed, would have prevented the very act to occur, for example, killing one's younger self. Consider the case in which Tim wants to go back in time and kill his grandfather, Gramps hereafter, before Gramps could generate one of Tim's parents. Tim has a gun in his hands, he is able to shoot, and all the conditions to commit the murder are perfect. It then seems that he could kill Gramps. However, he could not kill Gramps. His attempt must fail. Had he done it, Tim would not have been born. If Tim had not been born, he could not have traveled back in time to kill his grandfather. It is impossible for Tim to kill Gramps. Hence, the inconsistency between the possibility of time travel resulting to perform a self-defeating action and the impossibility of performing that action. The grandfather paradox, and all time-traveling paradoxes built around self-defeating actions, is canonically spelled out in terms of abilities. If time travel is possible, then Tim both has and lacks the ability to kill Gramps. We will present a slightly different version of the paradox based on the agent's potentialities. So 1. Time travel is metaphysically possible. So everybody wants time travel because it's fun and makes good stories. 2. If something has an iterated potentiality for it to be the case that P, then it is possible that P. So that's just saying if it's possible, if it's potential, then something is possible. 3. It is impossible for Tim to kill Gramps in 1922. So I guess that's when Tim can travel back to 1922. So in 1922, Gramps is an F, where Fs are physical duplicates of Gramps. In 2002, Tim has the potentiality to kill Fs. So all the 1922 versions of Grandpa, Tim has the potentiality to kill Grandpa because I guess Tim has a time machine. 6. Tim retains his potentiality to kill all Fs upon time traveling. 7. In 1922, Tim has the potentiality to kill Gramps. 8. It is possible for Tim to kill Gramps, and that contradicts line 3, which is the no self-defeat clause. So there, and then that's just a little contradiction symbol, and that's what this is, falsity. Yes, I know that's super fascinating to everyone out there, but this is how things are done. It's like, I just proved that you can't do this. We take premises 1 to 4 as unproblematic assumptions in the current dialectical context. 1 holds by hypothesis, that's the time travel one. 2 follows from adopting dispositionalism, that says, you have if something is a potential that you have, then it is possible. And note that 2 rules out any solution involving the ability to do the impossible. Accepting that there could be genuine potentialities to bring about the impossible would simply falsify dispositionalism, at least in its current form. Okay, as to 3, we take Tim's murder of Gramps as an instance of self-defeating action, and we take these to be metaphysically impossible, for performing these actions would bring about a contradiction. Thus, Tim's attempted murder of Gramps is more problematic than any old attempt to change the past. Finally, premise 4 is trivial, since F is just the property of having the same intrinsic physical properties as Gramps. Gramps is an F. It's just saying these are all the people that Grandpa was, like maybe at different time slices or whatever across all universes. The person that Gramps is back then, we're going to call that an F. That's just definitional. In what follows, we will often speak as if the potentiality to kill Fs is an intrinsic property, that is, one that Tim could have regardless of being accompanied or alone. Compare it with the intrinsic potentiality of a key to open a lock of shape T, as opposed to the extrinsic potentiality to open that specific lock. The commitment is not vital, it is part of the setup of the relevant time-traveling cases that all the extrinsic conditions obtain. We just need to ensure that Tim possesses and retains whatever intrinsic potentiality of his grounds, the potentiality to kill Fs. So it just needs to be part of Tim's being that he could potentially kill his grandpa. That's the whole point. And in the sense that we give him a power, a potentiality, a possibility. If you want to think that way, that's a question. Do we want to think that way? But that's what dispositionalism says. Do you have internal properties that give you these abilities, these powers. Is that how people actually are? I mean, it's not a crazy thought to think that this is how people are. We have abilities to do stuff, and our abilities are described as potentialities. That's what an ability is. You have ability to go run means that you have the potential to go for a jog. Like, they're synonyms. So that's all that's going on here, is it's saying that you have the ability to do something. And is that fundamental to being human, is having abilities? So this isn't like a crazy theory, like way far out here. All right. Author says, we think that premises 5 and 6 are highly intuitive, but will require a more substantial justification nonetheless. We turn to these in the next 2 sections. Okay. So this is the justification of 5. Yeah, see, this is what I was worried about too. They're trying to justify that Tim has the potentiality to kill all Fs, where Fs are the are the people that Gramps was back in 1922. Okay. We think that 5 is intuitive and prima facie plausible. Both Gramps and Tim are ordinary human beings. This means, unfortunately, that Tim has the potentiality to bring deadly harm to another human being, including those that are physically just like Gramps, who is not special in that regard. The burden of proof should be on those who want to deny the premise. We will justify 5 by considering and rejecting what strikes us as the best objection against it. The argument to deny 5 proceeds in 2 steps. The first step is to note that the premise is not specific enough. We can consider the potentiality to kill Fs as a determinable, grounded in more temporally determinate properties, such as the potentiality to kill Fs in 2023 or the potentiality to kill Fs in 1922. The second step is to concede that Tim has the determinate property as it is intuitive, but lacks the right determinate property that would spell trouble for the time traveling case. For instance, we could avoid the inconsistency if we could maintain that at 2022, potentially killing the Fs, Tim can potentially kill the Fs. At 2022, Tim can also potentially kill the Fs in 2023, and not at 2022. Tim can kill all the Fs in 1922. So thus, even if we grant that all potentialities are retained upon traveling to the past, in 1922, Tim would not have the potentiality to kill Fs, since he didn't have that potentiality in 2022 in the first place. So he can't go back. In 2022, he could kill all the people, but he can't kill all the people in the past. Yeah. So if like there were duplicates of Gramps now, he could kill them, the Fs, but he couldn't kill them if they were in the past. But I mean, that's the question. What's the time travel then exactly amount to? I'm not sure I get this exactly what's going on here, but whatever. I don't think they're gonna explain it away anyway. Okay. Vetter 2015 offers some reasons to accept the second step of the argument. She argues that generally, potentiality are future oriented. The only past directed potentialities what we have are those that have actually been exercised. That means if we have no potentialities for the past to have been different, though we have the potentialities for the past to have been just as the way it was. So assuming that Tim did not kill Fs in 1922, one might think that Tim in 2022 does not have any potentiality to kill Fs in 1922. That's fair, that if all of our abilities are forward facing, then applying them to things that happened before now may be illegitimate. I mean, that seems like defining yourself out of a problem, because Tim is somehow continuing a different timeline. Tim is still like doing things in Tim's current life, but like, how is he going back in time? But see, that seems like a time travel problem, not a potentialities or abilities problem. All right, authors say, we do not think that the argument against 5 is successful. In particular, the first step of the argument relies on a misunderstanding of how potentialities ground dated truths. The objection presupposes that potentialities ground dated truths, such as sugar dissolves at 12.0, or I guess it gets at noon, and Tim kills Gramps in 1922, etc., by pointing towards a temporally specific manifestation that something exactly potentially happens at that time, or the killing potentially happens exactly this time. In short, it assumes dated manifestations. Potentialities ground dated truths in virtue of being directed to a dated manifestation. We have argued elsewhere that this is the wrong account for dated truths and the temporal asymmetry of potentialities. There are no such things as fine-grained dated manifestations, such as those appearing in B and C. Alright, so they're saying, look, you have abilities, but abilities are never tied to a very specific time. So there's no specific fine-grained dated manifestation. So abilities are general things, and they are not forward-facing, they're not backward-facing, because they're not temporally fixed. And they say, there are only generic manifestations and hence generic potentialities, such as A above. We rehearse some of the arguments only briefly here. 1. Dated manifestations leads to an unacceptably profligate ontology. To each dated truth would correspond a specific dated manifestation. This in turn entails a corresponding multiplication of potentialities. This is because a power's identity is fixed, at least partially, by its manifestation. See, remember when I was saying abilities and powers? They just used power for the first time. This is a powers argument, that you have the ability or a power. So you're fixing that by its manifestation. Like if you can only kill someone at a very specific time, then the ability is fixed to that time. But that's wrong. No one thinks that. Okay, since the dated manifestations are distinct, so are the potentialities that bring them about. Thus, to each dated manifestation, there corresponds a specific property. So, dissolving something at 10 o'clock, sugar at 10 o'clock, is not the same as dissolving sugar at 10:01, which of course is wrong. Okay, 2. Dated manifestations is in tension with some of the most credible accounts of the nature of manifestations, for not all manifestations can be the sort of entity that is dated. Consider, for instance, Tugby's proposal that manifestations are Platonic universals. Platonic universals are absolutely independent entities. If they encoded information about temporal whereabouts, for example the property of breaking at 3:45, then some spatio-temporal point would be part of their essence. But if so, they would depend upon that spatio-temporal point, leading to a contradiction. These incompatibilities are a cost. Ruling out some of the most credible accounts of the metaphysics of properties for powers is not a welcome result. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you were time-basing your abilities, again, like I was saying earlier, no one thinks of like an ability to be fixed at a certain time and space if it is your ability. Like you may be only able to open a door that's locked at a certain time because it only opens at a certain time, like a safe, but that's not your ability. It's that you have the ability to open it and then it's blocked by something external to you. That is not a limit on your ability to open a door. So you gotta think, like, what is it to have an ability? Should it be... See, one thing that's interesting here, though, is this does not answer the forward-facing stuff, that you can only do stuff in the future, not in the past. But again, that would be a problem for time travel. So if you can kill your grandpa, it's sort of in the future for you, even though it's also in the past. So it's like doing two things at once. You're doing things at two times. Now, that's, again, like I said, a problem for time travel stuff, but not this... is not specific to saying you don't have the ability to kill your grandpa because the ability didn't happen in the past. Okay. And the author says, instead, dated truths should be accounted for without dated manifestations by invoking the following elements. 1. A potentiality directed at some generic non-dated manifestation. 2. The time of activation of the potentiality. And 3. A duration fact, a fact that specifies how long it takes a certain potentiality to bring about its manifestation since activation. Consider a vase that has the generic potentiality to break, which is activated at time t when, for example, the vase is hit with a hammer. If there is a fact to the effect that the potentiality to break brings about its manifestation by unfolding over an interval of delta, then the potentiality's activation at t is enough to make true the dated claim, possibly the vase breaks at t star, where t star is equal to the time when the hammer hit it plus the amount of time it takes to shatter. I mean, yes, this is a very complicated way of saying, look, you can add in the dated stuff to an ability afterwards so that you can say when something broke or when an ability was actually used. Crucially, these elements line up perfectly in the case of time traveling when preserving Vetter's point that there is a temporal asymmetry with respect to potentialities. Potentialities are forward-looking in that it takes some time for them to unfold and bring about their manifestation, so ordinarily the only potentialities we have will concern the future. But of course, if one travels back in time, the process will unfold in the past, while in a sense they keep unfolding forward. Thus, we do not need to accept temporally fine-grained facts such as B or C, let alone distinguish between those that Tim has and those he has not. All we need is the generic power A. Assume that the minimal duration of the process of killing Fs is delta. Thus, it will follow that X can kill F anytime T if and only if X has exercised their power to kill Fs at an interval as long as delta before T. And this can easily be granted in our case. Tim goes back enough that the putative date of Graham's death is well ahead, beyond the minimal duration of the killing process, and this is all we need to accept premise 5. It's interesting though. It's like it's saying you still have the ability. This is going back to saying you can time travel, to say you can start things that happen in the past. And so they're saying as long as you can start things that happen in the past, the potentiality, your ability will then go from whenever it starts. It's got a positive duration going forward, but that actually is fine because once it takes now I wonder where 5 is. I'm trying to find it. Okay. Still, Tim has the potentiality to kill F as long as you can, instantiate the potentiality to start at any time. So, where was I? Okay. 3. Justification of 6. Tim retains his potentiality to kill Fs upon time traveling. Okay, and so that's what it is. Once you get into the past, you only have to move forward at that point, but you have to be able to retain it while traveling backwards through time to kill your grandpa. Tim's potentiality to kill Gramps is not a fundamental property. Rather, it is grounded in some complex arrangement of more basic powers. Ultimately, these will boil down to his fundamental physical properties appropriately structured. Tim does not lose his fundamental physical properties when time traveling. Well, see, that's weird. We don't know what time travel is, so the fact that you can say that is maybe suspicious. I don't know. Well, this is because his fundamental potentialities have been exercised in the past. Tim in 1922 was a massy body which interacted with other physical entities, not some sort of ghost. Therefore, he has made a causal difference to the Earth's gravitational field, and to do that, the mass-related potentialities were being exercised. And one can only exercise the potentiality that they have. Same applies to the other fundamental properties. What about their arrangement? We can simply stipulate that upon traveling, their internal organization remains unchanged. Surely it is possible that Tim's earliest temporal part in 1922 has the same internal structure that his latest 2022 temporal part. So given that Tim's potentiality to kill Fs, that's his grandpa, is grounded in his more fundamental properties appropriately structured, we must conclude that it is at least possible that Tim retains his potentiality to kill Fs upon time traveling. And this is all we need to set the paradox off. In short, 1. In 2022, Tim's fundamental powers and internal structure ground Tim's potentiality to kill Fs. So yeah, you could potentially kill people like your grandpa in 2022. In 1922, at least some of, but likely all of, Tim's fundamental powers are exercised. So they're saying we're just taking 2022 Tim and putting him in the past. Therefore, in 1922, Tim must have retained his fundamental powers. Tim in 1922 has the same arrangement of fundamental powers as Tim in 2022. And lastly, therefore, Tim retains his potentiality to kill people like his grandpa. The argument works if Tim's fundamental powers and his internal structure fully ground his potentiality to kill Fs. That is, if this is an intrinsic property of sorts. But one could object that this is not the case. The potentiality to kill Fs is extrinsic. For it to be instantiated, it demands more of the world than what Tim alone can deliver. So the argument above is not sufficient. fair enough, the authors say. The problem is that even conceding that the potentiality to kill F's, people like his grandfather, is extrinsic, we have no reason to deny that Tim retains it in 1922. For what could be the non-intrinsic partial ground of Tim's potentiality that is missing in 1922? It seems that the most plausible extrinsic potential ground to potentially killing people like his grandpa would be the laws of nature, the existence of people like his grandpa, or the presence of some other mutual disposition partner needed to activate F, that is, the gun, the intention to kill, etc. But these elements are all in place in 1922. The laws of nature need not change upon time traveling. Gramps is an F and is standing right over there, so there is an F. And the setup of the thought experiment establishes X hypothesize that the circumstances are right, which means that all mutual disposition partners are there. What other extrinsic element could be missing to ensure that Tim does not retain his potentiality? We submit nothing is missing, hence in 1922, Tim still has the potentiality to kill Gramps. I mean, this is basically saying, look, if we're going to time travel, we want to time travel in the way we think time travel works. We want to take ourselves as we are now and go into the past. It's not like we're taking ourselves and we're going to have to undergo some grand physical change. You want to have you in the past the way you are now someplace else. That's what I mean. It's actually hard. It's one thing to say time travel is possible. It's another thing to say time travel is possible not changing you at all. And that's what they need here. Now, this is mostly what people think about, but it could easily be the case that if time travel is a reasonable thing that we could do. I mean, not reasonable, is something that we could do, that there would be restrictions on what happens to us when we undergo time travel. If you think of Terminator 2, or Terminator 1 for that matter. When Reese goes through time travel, he gets caught by the cops and they're asking him about time travel, and he's describing why they go, well, why didn't you bring any ray guns? And he goes, look, it's something to do with human body, living organisms. And then they're like, well, then how did the Terminator get through? He says it's surrounded by living tissue. So it's you can go through, but there's restrictions on this. And then they're like, well, why didn't you do this other stuff? And he's like, I didn't build the fucking thing. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't do tech stuff. But that's the whole point, is that even in our popular media, there are still restrictions on what time travel will requires of us. And so it's in the Harry Potter stories, there's time travel in book 3, book 4, whatever it is, and there's still things that happen there. So it's not so crazy to think that there are restrictions, but that's not what we want here. We want at least those restrictions not to affect you so much that you can't still pull a gun trigger. Okay, so we're assuming that you can at least pull it a trigger in the way you expect to be able to if you were to travel into the past right now. Okay, so 4, justification of the inference. The last option to resist the argument is to reject the inference from 4 to 6, that is to 7. That is, to deny that only because in 1922 Tim has the potentiality to kill F's and Gramps is an F, then Tim has the potentiality to kill Gramps. In our eyes, the most plausible way to do so is along these lines. In 1922, Gramps is an F, that is a person like Gramps, and Tim has the potentiality to kill people like Gramps. However, Gramps also has some further property G, such that Tim does not have the potentiality to kill F's that are G's. In this case, G might simply be the property of not being killed by Tim in 1922. So Tim doesn't have the potentiality to kill Gramps after all, and thus it is not possible for him to do it. Contradiction avoided. Alright, so the argument here is that, well, if it's your grandpa, it's special, and therefore ad hoc, you do not have the ability to kill your grandpa. Author says, this is just an attempt to adapt the Lewisian strategy to avoid the potentiality paradox. For Lewis, an agent can phi, and similarly phiing is possible for them, only relative to a class of compossible facts. Thus, killing Gramps is possible for Tim relative to a set of facts like Tim has a gun, Tim wants to kill Gramps, but not possible relative to a wider set of facts. Tim has a gun, Tim wants to kill Grandpa, and Gramps did not die in 1922. The problem is that the potentialities are not like that. Given dispositionalism, neither are possibilities. The Lewisian strategy cannot be applied here. Sinesemiak says, but really it's just the paradox that exposes the whole root problem. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, why can you kill him? And the paradox obviously has something to do with biological history. You can't live if you didn't have a grandpa. Or your grandpa didn't live long enough to have things. Yeah, and that all changes the downstream consequences. Yeah. So here's the thing. It's like, this is what they're trying to do here, is that say, look, there's downstream consequences that are going to change the sort of person that your grandpa was, in the fact that they were your grandpa, and that is a relevant fact here. So it's like that will change the downstream consequences, because if they weren't your grandpa, you might not be able to kill them. Hey Valpo, how you doing? Hope you're doing well today. Hope you got all your logic test kids graded stuff. We're reading a paper on the grandfather paradox and dispositionalism. So if you have the power to kill your grandpa, why can't you, commit the grandfather paradox under dispositionalism? Like you are disposed to kill your grandpa. Sinesemiak says, it makes time travel into what would be technically called absurd and contradicting, as in self-contradicting as a concept. Yeah, I think that's right, but that's part of the point. But the grandfather paradox just makes it very clear that it would screw up the world so bad that you couldn't actually do it. But again, like all the things, if you looked at all the consequences, like butterfly effect, the whole world would be different, and then you'd end up in a different spot. One class left. Well, I wish you strength in your duties to get that class done. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, once you start, I guess that's the Lewisian strategies they're talking about, is that once you start naming all the facts, then the whole world is different. So yeah. Long chance. So, but I guess I don't know dispositionalism, but the author is saying like you can do that, but not in dispositionalism. Potentialities are localized. You can't talk about all the things. They concern how a particular entity is. They do not depend on how the whole world around them is. Wang Chung? What's Wang Chung? I don't know. Has the world changed and I didn't realize it? That is, something can have potentiality simplicator and not relative to a set of facts. Hence, considering a wider set of facts or properties, for example, future facts, does not affect whether an entity has a certain potentiality or not. Okay, well, basically is what I think I was saying is like, saying your grandpa has the property of not getting killed by their grandson is ad hoc. And so you don't get to just add potentialities as you want, and so you don't get to consider a wider set of facts or properties like future facts. When you give them their powers, they have the powers that they have, not specific ones tied to a specific time, as the author mentioned earlier, but also not specifically tied to what your grandkid's gonna do. So like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, if you say you have the ability to, like, go for a jog, it's not that you have the ability to go for a jog because you're not going to be killed by your grandson from your time-traveling grandson. That's not the sort of thing we think of as your abilities or powers. Like, that doesn't make sense. There's an intrinsic property to you which allows you to go for a jog. There's nothing intrinsic about naming a specific fact relative to the grandfather paradox. Locality is a crucial fact about potentialities which cannot be readily dismissed. It is the feature that allows powers theorists to make sense of disposition ascriptions where potentialities are masked, and the ability to make sense of masked potentialities is one of the crucial advantages that irreducible potentialities have over the reductive accounts of dispositions. Consider the case of a fragile vase. It has the disposition to break if struck with light force. Now consider a mask. The vase is safely packaged in styrofoam. The system constituted by the vase and the styrofoam is not disposed to break if struck with light force. The related counterfactual, were I to hit the vase with light force, it would break, is false. Yet masks do not remove the potentiality they mask. The vase remains fragile. The counterfactual analysis of dispositions fails to make sense of masks because counterfactuals are sensitive to what goes on in the wider environment, indeed the whole world, and this does not line up with our intuition that the vase is still fragile and retains its potentiality to break. Just like the vase's fragility, Tim retains the potentiality to kill Fs, but that's people like Grandpa, even if Tim does not have the potentiality to kill Fs that are Gs. That's the Fs that are Gs are the ad hoc saying the ability to kill, like to violate the grandfather paradox. So okay, since Gramps is an F and a G, he is also just an F, and Tim does have the potentiality to kill Fs. Gramps being a G might mask Tim's potentiality to kill Fs in a way that Tim's potentiality will not get manifested, but it does not remove it. Crucially, if dispositionalism maintains that X having a potentiality to phi is a sufficient condition for it to be possible that X phi's, then this is enough to fully ground the possibility for Tim to kill Gramps. Yeah, so if you can kill people like your grandfather, then you have the ability to kill people that are your grandfather unless something interferes with that, but that would be an ad hoc thing that protects your grandfather specifically because of the grandfather paradox, but that does not affect the ability for you to have killed people like your grandfather. Okay, time travel and perfect masks. Yeah, so this is like, so they have like a protection ring around them, like styrofoam for a vase, but somehow the theory, I've heard this before, is that when people sort of come up with these like fantastical stories to prevent violating the grandfather paradox, like somehow you shoot and then the gun doesn't work, like it's always one more thing, but like the way that would work in metaphysics seems unbelievably ridiculous, but people say these things. Okay, normally the fact that masks do not eliminate the underlying potentiality and the corresponding possibility claim remains true is not a problem. The vase packed in styrofoam can still break, even though not here and now. We can remove it from the packaging, or the packaging might not be enough to save the vase anyway. A serious problem arises, however, when the masks are both perfect, that is, something which, whenever it is present, makes the manifestation of our disposition impossible, and necessary, that is, nothing has a potentiality to remove the mask. For in this case, we have the potentiality that cannot be manifested, generating both a possibility and an impossibility. The impossibility to carry out self-defeating actions is then a necessary perfect mask of sort, and the possibility of time travel, coupled with the fact that ordinary potentialities seem to be carried back in time, is what allows one to smuggle a potentiality under the mask, as it were. It is tempting, therefore, to seek out a resolution to the potentiality-based grandfather paradox that is in line with one's overall preferred strategy to tackle the issue of necessary perfect masks. Setting aside the option of simply abandoning dispositionalism, there are two broad strategies. Either one modifies the metaphysics of potentiality or dispositionalism in the way that prevents the conflict, for instance, abandoning the idea that potentialities are localized, or offering a more sophisticated account of how simple component potentialities interact with complex ones, or one finds a way to eliminate the necessary perfect masks. Both options are costly, but perhaps ultimately viable. Yeah, I mean, so if you somehow prevent yourself from going back in time, then you can't kill your grandfather because they are 100% protected from future people. Okay, the first option is prima facie unappealing. thinking that one must look beyond the dispositional property to know whether there is a corresponding possibility undermines the entire dispositionalist framework. Either 1, we have to admit that potentialities only partially ground modal facts, and the fully grounded and full grounds involve something more, or 2, we would have to look at potentialities of the whole world. Yeah, I mean, this is what I was saying. Radical disability, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Hope you're doing well. We're reading a paper on the grandfather paradox where, I mean, is it possible that you can go back and kill your grandpa? And the idea is that if you have the disposition to do it, does that actually, that sort of theory that you have the disposition and the ability to kill your grandpa and the ability to time travel, we're assuming you can time travel, that's going to make the grandfather paradox really hard to avoid. And they've been going through a bunch of the technical issues here. But it's like the idea is, could there be something stopping you from killing your grandpa just in the world? And so, yeah, we would have to look at the potentialities of the whole world. And so, yeah, as always, anyone out there, feel free to ask questions. My first time reading it. I don't know what's going on, but I'm trying to figure it out. So, both are borderline unacceptable for the dispositionalist. It is clear that one amounts to abandoning dispositionalism, at least in its canonical form. Yeah, I mean, if all of a sudden you lose the ability to kill your grandpa when we, by definition, at the start set it out, then yeah, that doesn't make sense. Radical Disability says, I'm going to send you a picture of all the books I organized, and there are political philosophy or political theories that it took forever, but I have enough for most of my books. Oh, cool. Neat. Are you gonna put it in the Discord? I don't have the Discord. Oh, did you send me a whisper? I'm sorry, Sam Max, I did not see this. Oh, it's a song. I see. Okay. Yeah. Let's click on it real quick. Let's see what this is. Oh, everyone have fun tonight. Yeah, I know that song. That's cool. So I didn't see that until now. Cinesemiax. Aha. Picture. No, I don't need it. That's a lot of books. Yeah, I see. I got it here. I don't have Discord on this computer, but I have it on my phone. I'm looking. So, yeah. You've got some very full bookcases there. Radical disability. Let's see. You got critical theory. Wow, you've got a lot of books. Yeah. Political economy. Charles Dickens. Reclaiming communist philosophy. So yeah. That's kind of cool. That's fun. But yeah, so it's a good bookshelf too. You got some nice bookshelves. I don't know if you wanted me to show that on stream, but I wasn't planning on showing other people's pictures on stream, but it's kind of cool. It's got a lot of stuff. You can't see, but behind me. Can you see? Let's see. You can see right there, right there. Those are stacks of books in bags, actually. So those are some of my philosophy books, are stacked in bags. So I've just got them in stacks. I don't have bookshelves at the moment. I had bookshelves, they got ruined. But that's a different story. So yeah. But yeah, I could use some new bookshelves. There's actually bookshelves over here, but they're got crap on them. Oh. I'm a mess. So anyhow, but yeah. What are you gonna do with all your books? Just read them? I guess that's what you do. Look at them, they're pretty. Alright, getting back to this. But as always, if you got more pictures, send me more pictures. It's cool. Oh, more pictures? Someone commented on your books. So. Okay. As to two, so if you say you lose powers by going back in the past, then you lose dispositionalism. Okay. And as for the other option, if the grounds of possibility were not localized, and we have to know how the world is as a whole before we can be able to know any modal facts grounded in potentiality, then it seems that dispositionalism loses much of its appeal in the epistemology of modality. Yeah, if like you have to all of a sudden test the entire world to know if you have the ability to like do something, like to go for a jog or whatever, then yeah, it's dispositionalism sort of loses its, like, what's the fun of saying you have a power if you have to check the entire world to make sure that your power is viable. Okay, but the other strategy, namely eliminating the necessary perfect masks, seems to be just as costly and unappealing. The necessary mask can be eliminated in two ways, either by 1, removing the masked power, or 2, removing the mask or showing that it's not perfect or necessary after all. Removing the masked power means either rejecting premise 1 and declaring time travel to be impossible. Yeah, that's the thing. If you say time travel is impossible, then of course you don't have to worry about grandfather paradox, but people don't want to do that. Radical says, yeah, it's a ton. I haven't read all of it, but I have read excerpts and use them to help build my political ideology. Well, that's what you got to do, and that's why you want to have the books at hand like that, because it's a lot easier to thumb through them than any digital stuff, because when you just see the digital files, it's like it's incredibly hard to just like poke around in them. You have to like know what you're looking for already. It's hard to skim. It's very different. But if you have a bookshelf like that, you know, you got your hands, or like however you go through it, it's a lot easier to, you know, flip through pages of books when they're actually there. And so yeah, that will help you, you know, get some good perspective on politics and things like that. It's a benefit to have that stuff there. And it's always good to go back to a book you know the book, like you know where things are in the book on the page. That way you can just like go right to it and see what the surrounding areas are. It's really nice. Okay. Yeah, so if you declare time travel to be impossible, well, then you don't have to worry about the grandfather paradox. Or showing that potentialities do not travel back in time, contra the arguments above. Yeah, if you just say that if you go back in time, you can only observe but not do anything, that's different. So, authors say, it strikes us that neither is appealing. Our best science seems to allow for the possibility of time travel, hence a fortiori for its metaphysical possibility. So there seems to be good reason to accept one, that is, that time travel is possible, and we hope that our arguments above are sound and convincing. This leaves us with the last option, removing the perfect mask. This would mean showing that killing one's own grandfather, auto-infanticide, and other self-defeating actions are not impossible after all, thus rejecting 3. This is perhaps the most viable option, but strikes us as costly still. So I mean, if you say you can kill your grandfather, I mean, maybe there's like a multiverse, and then like that whole multiverse shuts down all the worlds where you kill your grandfather, and all the other ones continue. I mean, maybe, but then you have to have the ontology of multiple universes all in parallel all at once, and then when someone does one of these logical contradictions, all of a sudden your universe goes poof, and Descartes says, I think not, and we all just disappear. Okay, conclusion. We have presented a potentiality-based version of the grandfather paradox and argued that it is much harder to dispel for the dispositionalist. Indeed, we suggested that time travel is an instance of a necessary perfect mask, dispositionalism's big bad bug, to which there does not seem to be a painless solution. Oh, see, that's interesting. Alright, so this is what they did actually. There was a big, this must have been a thing, where a necessary perfect mask was what one of these theorists had come up with that dispositionalism would have a lot of trouble with, and then these authors realized the grandfather paradox fit the bill. So that's kind of cool. And so that's what this is. This is a cute little essay. Again, you have to be a dispositionalist to care, or interested in the grandfather paradox to care, but it's a technical argument. Like, if you are considering a sort of why can we use certain views on people and our powers, our abilities, to somehow say, look, maybe we can get around the grandfather paradox. Well, this is one of the reasons why you don't want that to be the case, because if there is a grandfather, the potential for time travel, you automatically get yourself into a lot of trouble being a dispositionalist, because the only real option looks to be that you're going to get yourself into the grandfather paradox, a paradoxical state of affairs, and if you can't block that, then your whole logic goes down the tubes quite often. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I know this isn't like, you get to talk about the grandfather paradox, might not be the most exciting versions of it, but like it's not bad. Like, just it's a nice little technical argument about why you might think, like, things you might think about people, that we have powers, we can do stuff, and that has to do with how we are, not how the world is. But then if you try to talk about other things like going back in time and having the power to kill your grandpa, then all of a sudden it makes it very unpleasant to have that view of how people are. So yeah. Yeah, not a bad paper. I mean, it seems okay. Don't have a lot to say about it because it's like, am I a dispositionalist? I mean, it seems like a nice position saying, oh, people have abilities. That's all we're really saying. Now, are you going to build your whole metaphysics on the idea that saying that is what it is to be a person? You have different abilities, like dispositions to do things. It seems like that is pretty minimal, but like if you push it, and that's what these folks did, then you might find that you don't like all the things that happen. But yeah. Okay, so